Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rock Top Insider Press Pass podcast, the August 7th edition here on this glorious Wednesday. No rain today. It's been raining like crazy here in Knoxville. Not necessarily all day, every day, but it feels like every day there's been at least some rain in Knoxville today. We're smooth sailing so far, but we are deep into fall camp season here in the 865. I got Ryan Schumpert, Rick Butler here with me, who have been boots on the ground every day over on campus doing fall camp. Practice footage, presser updates, you have it. Everything that's been going on at fall camp at UT, Ryan and Rick have been having you covered over at Rock Top Inside. We're going to get into that today. Big injury update, as well as some buy or sell later on in the pod. But first, Ryan, how you doing today?
Doing well. No, we had Tuesday off. Tennessee had an off day between 3 days of practice in shells, and then today, Wednesday, was their first day in full pads. So good to be out there. First scrimmage for Tennessee on Friday night as we move a little bit closer and closer to season kicking off and further into fall camp.
Yeah, Rick, it's a busy time of year. One of the better times of year, I think. Just, football season almost being here. It's kind of like when it's almost Christmas, that anticipation is just building. And college football is this month. We're 24 days away now from opening day.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you starting the kind of the introduction like that, because I am just getting excited for football on a whole right now, whether it's college football and what we got coming up with Tennessee and the SEC, whether it's NFL. And if you wouldn't mind, there's just something I got to do real quick. It's not for you guys. It's not even for the audience. I just want to move a piece of hardware into the frame of the camera right here. This is my championship fantasy football trophy that I'm about to go on and defend at the end of the month or whenever the NFL season starts. So it's not for you guys, but I've got some buddies who are going to be watching this, and I just want them to know who is the rightful champion as we enter the season here. So I've got my kind of studio setup, my pseudo studio setup, but I really like the video thing that we've been doing, and obviously it's going to track forward even more. So a lot of fun stuff coming up ahead, but we got plenty of things to talk about right now for fall camp.
Rick, you've been mocking any? If you're going to defend that trophy, you got to start the mocking now if you haven't.
No. Oh, I've not mocked draft. I've not even looked into the top players. I'm just going to wing it. I don't know about it. Jack, I don't think you're like this because you are a true fantasy football junkie, but I won my one. That was my first. We've got an 11-year league. I've won my one. Yeah. I no longer have any pressure to just win a title in your league at some point.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get a little complacent here.
Though.
No, I'm gonna get a little complacent. That's my style. Yeah.
It's just like his world champion Texas Rangers, all-time World Series hangover this year. Can't even be above 500. 10 games out of the playoffs. Rick's going to be doing the same thing with his fantasy football championship.
Fun fact, Rick and I each won our leagues on the same day last year, December 31st, New Year's Eve. We each won our fantasy leagues. So we're both coming off championships. My belt is over there in my room. It's not in the shot as Ryan leaves to maybe turn a light on. But I get where you're coming from as far as getting complacent, but I just can't do that. It's not in my nature. And now that I have the taste of it, I feel like they'll start to build. Kind of like Xander Schauffele, like he got one. Now the snowball starts rolling. He's already got a second, probably going to carry over into 25 next year. So I think it's going to be my year again. We're going to go back to back, but we're not here to talk about fantasy football. We're here to talk about fall camp. Rick, as I mentioned, there's been a lot going on over on campus. You guys talked to Rodney Garner today, Glenn Ellerby a couple of days ago, quite a bit of players here over the past week since we've last podcasted. What's been your biggest takeaway specifically this week as you've talked to offensive linemen and defensive linemen?
Yeah, well, I'll actually start with today. And once again, for a second straight time, I think you've got a pretty good transition there, because if you talk about complacency from one season to the other, it's hard not to tell that Joshua Josephs is a player that has not been complacent this offseason. And I know that's something we might have mentioned on the last podcast, but today was the first chance that the media had the chance to actually have him down in the chair in the scrum style setting and get to talk to him. He was electric to talk to. You can go and watch it on the Rocky Top Insider YouTube channel right now. But sort of what we've seen on the field from Joshua Josephs, plus what he said today on Wednesday. And there was a lot of honesty. And maybe more honesty than I'm used to seeing during my time as a media member. I don't know if I've heard anything like this before, but he was very honest today, and he came out and said, look, I got a little bit jealous at times last season. Not jealous of other teams who had success. He got jealous of one of his teammates, James Pierce Jr., who was having that incredible success on the field, who was building his stock each and every game. And I think that Joshua Joseph felt like, man, I can be there too, but I'm not there right now. I need to get there though. And so it sounds like, man, he put his nose to the wall. He was really on his grind this season. He's come back. He looks like a different player, but it also sounds like maybe he's got a different mentality to his game. He talked a lot about just, hey, I'm letting things go and I'm trusting God, right? And a lot of different aspects of my game. So again, I really, we're only a couple hours removed from it, but I really did take that as a big takeaway from today. Just the honesty from him saying, hey, I was a little bit jealous of the success of one of my teammates, not because he was having it because I wasn't, but because I felt like I could be there as well. So I do think that that's one of the things that has really kind of been driving him over these summer months.
Yeah, it's rare to see players so open like that, and just talk about being jealous and something like that. And you look at last season, it makes a lot of sense because it felt like Josh Josephs was the guy that was being hyped up more than James Pierce. Josh Heupel masterclass last year, barely mentioning James Pierce leading up to the season. He was the perfect surprise for the Tennessee defense, whereas Josh Joseph, like I said, was the guy that was hyped up a little more at that Leo spot behind Roman Harrison as a sophomore breakout. Now, Josh Josephs maybe is the forgotten man on the Tennessee defensive line, and he can be that surprise for Tennessee potentially this year, as all attention will be on James Pierce. Ryan, what's been your biggest takeaway this week, and do you share that sentiment regarding Josh Josephs?
Yeah, for sure. And, not complacency that I think you'd expect there because he didn't have a very good year last year. I mean, Rodney Garner said it. He was like, he took a step back. He said, I think his quote was he's more like the guy that he was as a freshman than he was last year. And said something like sophomore lull or sophomore valley, something to that extent. So
sophomore slump.
Yeah, no, he looks, what's that?
It's the common saying, sophomore slump. But
yes, he didn't say sophomore slump.
That is the common saying, though. Yeah.
That is the common saying, but I know that's not what he didn't. He didn't say that because I thought it was weird that he didn't say that. But at that spot to me, it just continues to be fascinating. Of Tennessee is super deep at Leo, and you have Caleb Herring there too, who has added a lot of good weight. Still looks like he moves really well.
45 pounds, he said that he's added in the offseason so far. Again, just what he said to the media today, but 45 pounds. That's wild.
And he has that true pass rusher look that James Pierce has, of a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", super quick off the line, long arms. So, how does that all unfold from the fact that they all play at the same spot, the Leo spot, and just traditional first and second down. We haven't seen Tennessee really ever move around those Leos and play two of them at the same time. Now they will do that on third down packages, but outside of James, besides James Pierce, who's the guy on the other side on the third down package. So I continue to be really fascinated by that. I thought Rodney Garner, who's usually pretty negative about his group, talking to the media, trying to motivate guys and just a sense of they're not where they need to be. And there was certainly some of that today. It wasn't like Rodney Garner was all sunshine and smiles, but to me, he seemed a little more positive than maybe he's been in past years. So that stood out. And I think the defensive line there was more entertaining topics or more interesting topics today there compared to the offensive line earlier in the week, where the offensive line continues to kind of be the one real interesting nugget I found was that Glenn Ellerby said they want to substitute more there, which to me is still a very interesting thought. But besides that, I think offensive line, we kind of have a good feel for what it's going to look like, and everything was pretty par for the course when we talked to those guys earlier in the week.
Just because of the lack of depth, right, Ryan, with the offensive line. Talk about Glenn Ellerby substituting more. It feels like the offensive line is a little top-heavy this year compared to maybe some years past, and that's a testament to how talented those starters are.
Yeah, for sure. I also just say I'm not a huge fan of rotating it along the offensive line in general. I think that's kind of a spot where continuity to some extent is important. Like if you're going to alternate a left guard, where you have Jackson Lampley and Andrej Karic, who seem to not have a ton separating them. Yeah, that makes sense. But I wouldn't want to be alternating a bunch of guys where you have truly different looks, and a lot of guys that to me, continuity seems like such an important thing for offensive line, of those guys working. They got to work together as a unit more than any other unit on the field. So them understanding each other and just having a comfort level, I think, is important. So we'll see what that ends up truly looking like. But I found that interesting, and certainly the depth, especially the tackle spots, would seem to make rotating a ton. And Cooper Mays is going to be in there every play if Cooper Mays is healthy. So just what that would look like is kind of curious to me.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that and say that I do think it's top heavy, like you mentioned, Jack, and not that because that those are the only 6 guys in the room. There are still good talent in the room. You've got some 4-star prospects. You've got some really talented players back there, but maybe they're just not ready yet. And I think that's kind of one of the keys to the season of, do I expect Tennessee to be rotating offensive line against Georgia and Alabama and their most stout teams? Absolutely not. But are there opportunities throughout the season where, we talk about getting players in during garbage time, and obviously that's just an aspect of college football, but are there opportunities where maybe a game is starting to run away and you can get those guys in, not just because it's garbage time, but actually get them in and not have a big fall off from what they've been doing so far for the rest of the game so far? So I'm with Ryan. That was definitely something that kind of struck with me. Certainly had been thinking about it throughout the week, and we'll see. I don't see that being too big of a possibility, but I want to see, and I think it would be positive if there are opportunities for Tennessee to get some of those rotations in when a game is handled, or just when they feel like they have the opportunity to. Because again, we're dealing with a very veteran line right now. We're not talking about the 2025 season, but eventually we will. And you'd like some of those players to, again, have some of that time on the field. Now we'll see what happens throughout the season, but I do think that the offensive linemen that are probably going to be the ones that you see the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I've said in the past of, talking about the depth of, if so-and-so goes down, you don't have someone to step up that you've seen a lot of. Well, I think, the natural rebuttal to that would be, well, these guys have been returning starters. So, yeah, no duh, you haven't seen the guys. Well, the thing is, these guys are all super young players. And you just go look at Tennessee's roster along the offensive line outside of Dane Davis, just about everybody that's not in that starting group or not in that starting six, they're underclassmen. So all these guys, offensive linemen that Tennessee brought in, like Heupel's first and really even into the second recruiting class, all those guys have transferred. All those guys, I don't think they were massive losses. Go look at the schools that they ended up. But Tennessee just didn't land the type of guys that they needed to build quality depth where you feel like, all right, these backups, yeah, they're backups. They haven't been able to play a ton because the returning starters are back, but they've been in the program for 3 years. They've been in the weight room for 3 years. They're ready. And maybe some of these guys are ready. It's certainly possible. Sophomores are ready all the time to start or to play meaningful football in the SEC. It's just a little bit more unproven to me at this point.
Yeah, as I mentioned last week, 9 true freshmen or redshirt freshmen in the 2 and 3 deep for Tennessee's offensive line. Outside of Dane Davis, like you said, Ryan, who kind of feels like just the perfect backup offensive lineman. He could play multiple positions for Tennessee. I mean, heck, he took snaps at center last year, could play inside, could play outside. So he feels like the most versatile backup. Tennessee has the top reserve, along with whoever doesn't win the left guard job, whether that's Carrick or Lampley. Those 2 guys are a little bit above everyone else. And then, like I said, you got the young guys after that, and that's pretty much it. So if injuries occur along the O-line, some youngsters are going to have to step up for Tennessee's offensive line. Let's move on to the bad news for Tennessee, which broke Sunday morning, I believe, if I have my day correct. That's Jourdan Thomas out for the season, knee injury. This is a big hit for Tennessee's safety spot, or safety depth, really the star spot specifically, as that's where Jourdan Thomas was expected to start. Now, is it Boo Carter time in Tennessee as a true freshman starting at star? Potentially. Maybe it's Christian Charles finally having his moment in the sun after an injury-riddled first 3 years with the Tennessee Vols. That's going to be a camp battle to watch there to see who starts at star. But just the safety depth in general, Ryan, I know you've talked about it quite a bit over this last month on various podcasts. That corner can feel pretty good about where Tennessee's sitting, at least with the top 2 guys. But safety, it's a little bit more of a question mark.
Yeah, it is. And it's a combination of depth and just the starters that haven't played a lot of football, or at least football in the SEC. And I don't feel like high ceiling guys either. Where some of those corners maybe haven't played a lot of football, but they feel like high ceiling guys, at least to me. But no, it's a big blow for Tennessee to have Jourdan Thomas go down for a lot of reasons. Like you said, it seemed like he was going to be a starter at star. Him and Andre Turrentine have probably, of the safety star options for Tennessee, those two guys have played the most football. Not that it's been a ton, but they've been out there in meaningful games in the past. And, I think Thomas would have played more last year if it wasn't for some minor injuries kind of in the back half of the season. Remember seeing, some of, not William Wright. I'm blanking on his name. The white safety, Will Brooks. Yeah. That, when Thomas got hurt, McDonald got hurt, and then Thomas was playing, and then Thomas got hurt, and Will Brooks came in and played, I think, really starting in Missouri in those final 3 games of the regular season. So it's a blow, I think, from that standpoint. It's a blow at the star spot, and it's a blow for when you talk about safety. Safety's kind of one of those spots, and, I did the depth chart before the start of, or my projected depth chart before the start of fall practice, where, it's not typically a great sign when you start listing the backups and you're listing guys that are either the backup at another spot or starting at another spot. And, that typically says, all right, maybe there's not a ton of depth here. There's not a ton of guys. And that's, Jourdan Thomas was that way, where I think I had him as the starter at star, and he was the backup, the number 2 guy at the safety spots. So it's a blow in a lot of different ways. And certainly a guy that there seemed to be a level of trust in at a really new unit that's going to be breaking in a lot of starters.
Yeah, I'm with Ryan. I don't really think that there's a giant way to kind of undersell this. I think this is a big blow for Tennessee, and it's not like Jourdan Thomas was a player who was one of the best defensive backs in the country.
Right.
And knew what he was going to be. But I think there were good expectations for what Jourdan Thomas was going to do here in this 2024 year with Tennessee. We've talked about it a lot this summer, right? All the transition, just kind of the new, the wave of newness that lied ahead, what was going to come of it. I think Jourdan Thomas was one of the players that people, including myself, including you guys, were excited to see. How is he going to take that next step? How is he going to make that jump? And I do think that you pretty much had him penciled in as the starter at safety, as star, wherever you want to put him, because he is a talented defensive back. So you lose him for the whole year. I do think that is a big blow. I've not really gone through my record prediction wins, losses, but I wonder about how that's going to impact. Now, Ryan does make a good point as well. It's not like also, Tennessee had a 10 out of 10 safety unit and that this is a big blow. It's still going to be a unit that does, that's going to need to kind of find their way throughout the season. So is it going to be a true freshman like Boo Carter? Is it going to be a second-year sophomore from Mississippi in John Slaughter? Is it going to be somebody like Christian Charles, who you talked about a second ago? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and continue to watch fall camp to see what they do. Obviously, this injury only happened over the weekend, so we're still kind of keeping our eyes down the field when we go to practice to see what that rotation is going to look like. We don't get to see too much, but we're certainly trying. But I do think that's a big question for Tennessee to now have to answer here in these next couple of weeks.
Well, it feels like Turrentine and Jacoby Thomas are, would be everyone's pick to start at the safety spots week 1. Now, the star spot is the one that's obviously up in the air. I feel like week 1 against Chattanooga, Tennessee is going to roll out someone with some experience. I just don't think Boo Carter is going to start week 1. I would pick Boo Carter to probably become a starting safety for Tennessee as the season goes along. But when you look at early on in the season, maybe they roll with an experienced guy, whether that's Christian Charles or it could be McMurray, the Temple transfer. Which way do you guys lean? Ryan, do you think Tennessee is going to lean towards that more experienced route potentially for whoever is going to start at that star spot? Or do you think that Boo Carter really has a true opportunity to be the starter week 1 and just be a guy for Tennessee's secondary?
I mean, I think he has a chance to, yeah, for sure. I've kind of not flipped, but altered my view here where I lean more towards thinking he won't be the starter to start the season. And I don't really know where the change is. I mean, obviously Chattanooga is the first game. So if you think he's close to being the starter, you probably start him against Chattanooga because that's not a game you're too worried about. Obviously North Carolina State week 2 is the one you point to, but it's just from the standpoint of they've played such few true freshmen across the whole roster, certainly not on defense, and certainly not even young players in the secondary, that I'll lean towards thinking it's Christian Charles or, McMurray is still hurt right now. Hasn't really been doing anything in practice that we've seen. I guess today he did have a red non-contact jersey on and was doing a little bit more than he had been doing in a brace on his right knee. So maybe one of those two guys, Charles feels like the most likely. Maybe Christian Harrison makes a push. But just the way Tennessee's handled injuries like this or young players like this in the past makes me a little more skeptical of it being Boo Carter. But look, I'd also say you got Chattanooga and then North Carolina State and then Kent State. Like, that's NC State's a tough game, but like that's if you want to break somebody in, that's the time to do it. To me, it gets a lot harder after that when you get into whatever it is, 6 or 7 straight SEC games.
Yeah, it's a little bit bad hosting on my part. Did not preface the question like I intended, but this is one of our buy or sells if Boo Carter starts the season opener. I'm selling. Sounds like Ryan's leaning towards a sell here.
Yeah,
Rick,
I'll sell as well.
Rick, where do you stand? Buy or sell? Boo Carter starting August 31st.
Well, I appreciate you putting the pressure on me right before my answer that I have to buy or sell. I'll start with this. I think when you look at Boo Carter, let's go down the pros and cons list, right? Pros. He's got phenomenal instincts. He's got phenomenal athleticism. He's a guy who can fly from sideline to sideline. He's a guy who also has a very recent understanding of wide receivers and what they want to do. Now, obviously, I'm not making a comparison between the high school level and the college level about what offenses and receivers are doing. That would be crazy to do, but it at least is a little gear that can maybe turn in his head. On the flip side, though, he does lack that experience. I think there are players who might understand the system a little bit more. There are a couple players who have been sitting and watching and waiting for that chance to go. And I do wonder if Willie Martinez is going to go in that direction. It's funny. I hate going last on these kind of things because I do fall in line with you guys. I think that Boo Carter has every ability to be one of these freshman standouts, and not that he'd have a phenomenal, a game-changing or a season-changing season, but I think he's the kind of dude that can maybe come in and have an impact during his freshman year. Will that be right away? I don't know, but I do really like what Ryan said a second ago in saying that, hey, look, you do have a really tough game in Oklahoma. And yes, that North Carolina State game is too. Tennessee cannot afford 2 losses in the first 4 weeks. Somebody needs to kind of be getting ready for those games. Somebody needs to be really taking the opportunity in Kent State and Chattanooga to be able to get those valuable reps, to be able to get that confidence so that when they go into either North Carolina State or when they go into Norman, Oklahoma for that OU game, they're going to feel a little bit more confident. So I do lean towards sell as well. I do think that Boo Carter could have an impact on the season, but as we stand right now, just kind of in these first few days of the injury to Jourdan Thomas, I'm not necessarily thinking it's going to be Boo Carter, but that doesn't take anything away from the amount of potential I think he has.
Yeah, I think regardless, he'll have an impact at some point. Whether it's simply just on special teams and he doesn't really break through in the secondary, I think Boo Carter will have an impact in some sort of way for Tennessee football this season. And I do think that at some point it'll be in the secondary. But week 1, if I had to put my money on it, I think Tennessee rolls with an experienced guy. Like I said, whether that's the Temple transfer, who of course hasn't played a game in a Tennessee uniform, or someone who's been in the program a couple of years, like a Christian Charles, feels like that's the route they'll take.
I will buy Boo Carter starting a game at some point this season as star. I will buy that. I just think Charles being that Swiss Army knife and the lack of depth Tennessee has elsewhere, like I feel like he will get an opportunity at some point. That room's just so thin as a whole, and
right.
Both the guys that would also be, competing with, or the top guys to me, being McMurray and Charles, both having that versatility and potentially, even if they don't get injured, having to move elsewhere and play. To me, makes it seem, I think he'll end up starting a game.
Yeah, and on that point, I can, see potentially a situation down the road where, let's say things get a little bit into a desperate territory for Tennessee, and they say, you know what, we need to make a splash move. We need to do something to shake this up. Maybe if things aren't going well in the secondary at that time, maybe giving Boo Carter a start is kind of that, hey, he might not have the experience and he might not have, every scheme perfectly down, but maybe he can kind of be that X factor to jolt the secondary. So I think that's a good point by Ryan right there.
It would be a fun storyline too, week 1, if Boo Carter started against Chattanooga.
It would, especially after the recruitment.
Native. Yeah. Ryan, before we move on, just real quick, is there any dark horse here that maybe fans should be keeping an eye out for the star spot that we haven't mentioned?
No, not that we haven't mentioned. Maybe it's Jordan Matthews. I still kind of think he sticks out wide. Being a young guy, I think that's where they'll continue to have him. I guess Christian Harrison, who I've mentioned, would be to me more of the dark horse.
Got it. All right, let's move on. Let's keep it with the defensive side of the football, though. Buy or sell, Rick. Tennessee leads the SEC in sacks.
Thank you very much, Tony Reale of 2013 Around the Horn. We talked about that in our group text today. There was a block, man, coming home from school around 2012 where you had Around the Horn and then PTI back to back. That was a transformational time in my life. Let me tell you right there. So I like the buy or sell. This guy, I might be getting a little optimistic here. Might be a little recency bias, but I think that when you talk about Tennessee's defensive line, you talk about just all the weapons that they had. I didn't think that Jackson Moy, the transfer defensive lineman, was maybe as impressive as he has been to the coaching staff yet. Rodney Garner came out today and said, look, I gave this guy a list, or maybe that wasn't it. Maybe he said I had a plan for him, and he quickly exceeded the plan to where we now had to change and alter the plan moving forward. I think that's one of those things where, like Ryan was saying, it's not something you hear from Rodney Garner a lot, but he did sound impressed about what he can do. This is a veteran-led group. This is a very experienced group. They know what the grind of the SEC looks like. They know how to be competitive and be successful in the SEC. And then they've just got some dogs. Now Joshua Josephs, we've got this video over on our Twitter account, the RTI Twitter account. He goes through all the players, the interior defensive linemen, the edge rushers. And it's safe to say that we're not going to see all of them throughout the season, right? But just the list that he kind of goes down, I think it does give me a lot of optimism. And I do look around and say, this group does have some potential. And yes, the starters are going to be good. But when you get into the thick point of the third quarter, the start of the fourth quarter, when you do need some key rotations in order to be able to get your starters a bit of a quick rest before they can come back in and close out the game, I don't know how much drop-off there's going to be. James Pierce Jr. is his own category, right? Tennessee's got good edge rushers behind him, but I really don't know how much drop-off there's going to be. Obviously, there's going to be some, but I am optimistic, and I am high on this defensive line right now. So was your question they're going to lead the SEC in sacks? Buy or sell that?
Lead the SEC in sacks. You got it.
I'll tentatively buy. It's more to the point of I really think that Tennessee's just got some deep players and there's some optimism around them. But I will openly say that I haven't done a full deep dive into what other SEC programs' defensive lines are going to look like. We know that Georgia's going to have a stout defensive line. You can say that Alabama's going to have a stout defensive line. So Texas A&M maybe as well. Ole Miss certainly adding Walter Nolan. Like Tennessee doesn't have really a Walter Nolan in the middle of the defensive line. So the comparison is hard to do right now until we see things on the field, but I'm buying the fact that Tennessee will have a chance simply because of their depth and experience.
Well, Ryan, I'll put it this way, Enric. Tennessee was second last year behind A&M by just one sack, and A&M arguably lost their best defensive lineman in Walter Nolan. So Tennessee didn't lose much along the defensive line at all. Sure, Tyler Barron, but I think if Josh Joseph's taken another step, I know Ryan's been high on some interior guys like David Hobbs, Elijah Simmons healthy. It could be, I think it's going to be better this season.
Yeah, no, and I did my research, so I knew that stat. And I'm not going to be a coward like Rick. I'm buying. I think it's multiple things. It's what you said. They were one off last year. I think they'll upgrade as a whole when you look at that third down pass rush. And I think when you talk about the weakness on Tennessee's defensive line, it is the D tackle. Not that it's a huge weakness, but it's not as much as strength. Well, to me, you're not leaning on getting a bunch of sacks from that spot anyway. And I think Omar Norman-Lott, when it comes to being a pure pass rusher from the interior, is a really good defensive tackle pass rusher. So I'm buying it. They were one off last year. A&M, I think we'll have a really good defensive line again. Ole Miss would be the other one I'd point to. Obviously, they got the Prince kid or Princely, however you pronounce his name, from Florida, who led them in sacks last year, in addition to Walter Nolan. And it's the fact that, and we've seen it with the tackle for loss numbers the last few years more than anything. Tennessee's defense is on the field for so many plays in any singular game because of how quickly their offense plays. So, and just how many possessions there are in a Tennessee game sometimes compared to other games. So with all that in mind, I will buy it. And I think Tennessee's pass rush will be a little bit better this year. And they were, I think, 7th in the country last year. I want to say 8th in the country last year. So they were just one off a year ago from being atop the SEC. And I'll say they get it done this year.
Yeah, James Pierce, 10 sacks last year. He returns. Tyler Barron was second with 6. He's gone. But as I mentioned, some of those other guys could take steps. Josh Joseph still had 3 sacks last year. Omar Norman-Lott, 5.5. And you think about his snap count compared to some other guys, it's going to be much lower. So Omar Norman-Lott, I think, is a sneaky player along that defensive line, is just as far as who's going to get a lot of sacks. So there's a ton of potential here. I'm borderline hammering this. I am buying. And I feel like I'm not going to say it's obviously going to be a wide gap. That's a hard stat to have a wide gap in, but I think it could be by like 4 or 5. I think Tennessee could clearly have the best pass rush in the SEC and therefore lead the league in sacks.
Yeah, maybe convincing, maybe not like massive, but definitely
Right.
the most kind of. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
they're
mean
not going to lead the league by 8, but I'm thinking 4 to 5 is potentially gettable.
yeah, and it's also
Again,
just the nature too of Tennessee's offense of a lot of times playing with the lead. We've seen them get off to these good starts. Tennessee's pass defense is going to be worse than their run defense, or at least their secondary is the weakness that we think on this team. So to me, it seems like you're on top of all those plays. A lot of teams are going to be in passing situations against Tennessee, which obviously affords more opportunities.
yeah, and I think the defensive line can play 4-quarter football, and that is extremely important in the SEC, especially the new look SEC. They'll be able to play 4-quarter football with the depth and the rotations that they have. So I think that's another reason that kind of points you in that direction.
Tennessee defensive line is strength for the team. We're not breaking any news here. Let's go to another position on the other side of the ball that could be a strength. We've talked about this being, a high ceiling position, or maybe just an average position, and that's wide receiver. There's a lot of outcomes, wide range of outcomes for this wide receiver group. But we're going to talk about the depth here with this question, Ryan. Buy or sell? Tennessee rotates 6 receivers during games. This would obviously be a new thing for a Josh Heupel offense, but as we've repeatedly said, this is probably the deepest the spot has ever been in this era.
I'm gonna sell. It wouldn't shock me, but I just have to see it to believe it. Like you can pick the 6 players, and I can say, yeah, like sure. You go down the list and say, is this player going to play every game for the Tennessee? Is this player going to play every game for Tennessee? And you could probably get 6 deep, and it would be hard for me to say no to any of them. But I just got to see it to believe it. I think they'll do more. I don't think it'll be purely 3 like it's been for last year. They did a little bit more. And injuries was a part of that too. They just clearly didn't have a great 3, especially when Brew McCoy went down. But I don't know. I'm hard pressed to truly believe it. So I'll go sell. What exactly that looks like? I think 5 would be my number. I think someone will end up having a breakout year and a type of year where they're just not going to take them off the field in meaningful games, and then at the other spots, they'll have 2 guys that'll play each game.
And even 5 would be more than normal for a Heupel offense, as we've seen. I think if they rotated 5, that would be a new thing for Tennessee, and that would just show the depth they have.
Yeah, 5 is the answer that I came up with, Ryan, unless you got anything else that you want to finish that off with.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I was just thinking, I feel like they did a little bit of 5 last year after Brew went down.
Yeah, but it was because of injury, though. They had all these guys with inexperienced guys, and it was just kind of seeing what was working, I think. Whereas this year, if there's no injuries, you know what you got.
They were throwing, the passing offense was floundering, and they were kind of throwing stuff at the wall. Because Dante Thornton was kind of that swing guy. To me,
which he wasn't. He wasn't in the game plan really at all early in the season. I mean, you saw Brew, Keaton, Squirrel.
Thornton subbed with Squirrel a lot in the slot early in the season.
Yeah.
Now he dropped a lot of passes and got himself out of the rotation pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, it was Ramel after Brew went down. Ramel, Nimrod, Caleb Webb, Squirrel every game, and then Thornton's role was kind of up and down. They kind of threw crap against the wall to see what stuck a little bit. It felt like with him at different spots.
Yeah, I'm going to sell as well. I think, and starting off, you can say if Tennessee unfortunately suffers an injury at some point through the season, I think that plays into effect too. But I mean, let's just look at the guys here kind of fighting for those spots. You have Squirrel White likely being the starting slot guy. You have Brew McCoy, Chris Brazell, and Dante Thornton as your outside guys. So there's 4, right? Mike Matthews is a 5-star wide receiver. He's just a freshman, but a lot of people have been raving about what he can bring to the table. Granted, he has been a little bit limited at practices that we've seen so far. So sort of what does his beginning of the season look like at the very least? Then you go down to 2 guys who I think people are very familiar with as rotational sort of backup wide receivers, and that's Chaz Nimrod, who's been working in the slot position so far that we've seen throughout training camp, and then Caleb Webb on the outside. I don't see a situation where you're talking about, Mike Matthews and a combination of Chaz Nimrod or Caleb Webb being a consistent rotational piece of this offense. So will there be times where, Tennessee can get 6 wide receivers in? I absolutely think so. But I do feel like there's not a high likelihood of 6 per game. You feel like there's going to be quick rotations. You feel like you're going to see those players throughout the game. I just don't really buy that happening. So I think that Tennessee's got their 5. Whatever that 5th looks like, I think will kind of be that rotational piece. But I don't think we're sitting here at halfway through the season saying, man, Tennessee's got 6 wide receivers that they use all the time in different ways moving forward. So that's just kind of the way that I see it breaking out. And again, some of those players are as good as expected. If Chris Brazell can really be the versatile talent that, that Tennessee believes he can be, that I think a lot of the fans think he can be, then, hey, you're kind of, shortening up that room a little bit because you found a guy who can operate in the offense. So I think 6 is a little ambitious.
Yeah. Who do you, and you guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but Ryan, if we take the top 4 as, Brazell, McCoy, White, and Dante, who would be the 5th guy you would point to as could get the most snaps of the others? So whether that's a freshman and Mike Matthews, which I think would probably not be your answer, but Weber Nimrod seems like one of those guys. Which one do you think is potentially in line for more work this season as that 5th guy for Tennessee at wide receiver?
I think it's Nimrod. I've always thought he's ahead of Webb, and he can play inside and outside. And
Right.
he's a guy that it feels like there's been a lot of positive buzz about here early in fall camp. So I would go with Chaz Nimrod.
I believe he had a really nice touchdown during the spring game as well. He caught that from Nico, showed a little bit of a connection there too. So I'd typically agree.
Yeah, he's 6'3" guy, could play in the slot and out wide, as Ryan said. So that versatility is valuable. I think it does make him more valuable than Caleb Webb. And he flashed a little bit late last season. I'm selling this too, to see it to believe it thing. Kind of the same way with Boo Carter a little bit. Just haven't seen it yet in a Heupel offense, and 6 seems too deep at 5 potentially this year, which would be more than normal. Let's move on to let's keep it on the offense. Tight end, another position that is arguably the deepest it's been in the Heupel era. Some really good athletes at tight end this year for Tennessee. When you talk about Holden Stays, the Notre Dame transfer, of course, Ethan Davis entering year 2, who has had some flashy moments and of course was a big time recruiting land for Tennessee way back when, December of 21 or 2022, maybe. It was a long
21.
time ago. He was 21. Yeah, December 21. Before his senior season in high school. So got those 2 guys, and then Miles Kitzelman from Bama. So Rick, Tennessee plays 3 tight ends this year on a regular basis. Buy or sell?
The regular basis is the part that's kind of, it's kind of have me hesitate a little bit. I think that we're going to see all 3 tight ends. I think that they were brought in for specific reasons. I don't know what that rotation is going to look like. This might be the one I'm least confident in, but I do think that Tennessee has the ability to play those 3 guys, and I think they might each bring a little bit something different to the table, but I don't know what it's going to look like. Tennessee last year, they used Jacob Warren and McCullen Castles exclusively. Ethan Davis was that freshman in the backup role, but I think that's just because they felt so good. And they weren't, they felt good about what Jacob Warren and McCallan Castles presented. I don't think they really needed to put Ethan Davis in that situation. I also don't know how much they were using those tight ends, right? We saw Castles kind of, he had his moments in the end zone, but it wasn't like, to me, that was a forefront of what they were doing in the offensive system. So I'm going to maybe say yes, buy. I think that these guys were brought into the program for a reason. Obviously, they're all a little bit different, kind of committing from December to January, whenever those took place. But I do think that there's chances for them all 3 to get in per game. I don't know if it's going to be fully equal rotations. I would probably lean against that, but I do think you're going to see all 3 of them in the game. So I'm going to buy. I would say hesitantly buy, or at least kind of nervously buy, but I think that would cause a comment from Ryan as well. So I'm just going to.
Yeah, you can't get called a coward twice in one podcast.
I'm aware.
Over-under was,
I'm aware of that.
1.5. So you got to hit the under here.
I'm aware. I know.
Indecisive Rick, they're calling him. I'm not calling him that.
Fake news.
I'll sell for a lot of the same reasons. Really twofold. and it's that I'm high on Ethan Davis. I think I still don't expect Tennessee to throw the tight ends a ton. I just don't think that's a big part of Heupel's offense. Like, I just don't think the way they scheme it and how much they want to do stuff to the boundary, that throwing the tight ends is ever going to be a massive part of it. But I think Ethan Davis is really talented. I think he's the best receiving tight end that they've had at that spot since Heupel has been there. So combine that with the fact that Kitselman, and I think he's competent, and certainly there's been some positive buzz around him. And it was Alabama. It's a great program that he's at, but he didn't play any meaningful snaps in his 2 years at Alabama. So combining those two things, and then just a lot of the same, where Tennessee we haven't seen more than two. But again, they really haven't had more than two to play the last couple of years. They've really been limited in what they can do. But just with that standpoint, and with the way they sub, with the way they do substitutions offensively, where it's like you're going to be in for a full drive if you're out there. That makes me think that they'll stick with two with Holden Stays and Ethan Davis.
Yeah, and one more thing on those tight ends real quick. It's just Ethan Davis, 6'5", 246. Holden Stays, 6'4", 248. And then Miles Kitselman, 6'5", 256. They're all right in the same range. I mean, 1 inch and 10 pounds off of all of each other. But I think that Miles Kitselman might be the biggest. Maybe maybe Tennessee decides, hey, we really feel good about what Ethan Davis and Holden Stays can do with their hands. Maybe Miles Kitselman is a little bit better of a run blocker. Again, those are the things that I don't know how they're going to work out until we see it on the field. So I think that Kitselman is probably the biggest tight end. Maybe he gives you a little bit of an advantage there in run blocking, but maybe those other guys can do it fine. And Tennessee kind of whittles back down to the 2-man rotation. So I can actually see a couple of different options happening, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that's the path to 3 to me. Is that Ethan Davis just struggles in run blocking because he was a pure receiver. That was the big question about him last year, coming off the collarbone injury his senior year in high school. If he struggles to block, then it'll probably be 3. If they think he can hold up well enough, I think it's 2.
Yeah, that's a good point. It feels like if Tennessee is going to incorporate tight ends in the passing game between the 20s, which is what we haven't seen a whole lot, Ethan Davis would be that guy. Maybe it's Holden Stays, but it feels like Ethan Davis would be the top candidate to be that guy, to be the receiving threat at tight end, and Kitselman would get snaps as a blocker. Tennessee's been on a recruiting heater at tight end. Of course, they have 2 4-star lands in the 25 class, flipping Brame, just got Carson Snead to commit in the 26 class. It feels like they've been on a, tight end heater, as I mentioned, and maybe this is the year with more talent, receiving talent, especially they've had at the tight end position than in years past, that we see that integrated into the Heupel offense. I'm not just going to completely dismiss this as it's, just not possible. Not that Ryan's saying that, but I honestly think that maybe it's a little likely this year that we see more of that because of what they've been doing on the recruiting trail, because how they've been valuing the position in the portal, getting Holden Stays. It feels like maybe it's something that we could see this year. That's a new little wrinkle.
Maybe, yeah. I'm just skeptical. They had to get tight ends because they didn't have tight ends on the roster. That's why they had to get tight ends. They had Ethan Davis and nobody else. And then, obviously you're always going to recruit the best players you can. And even you look at it now, it's Kitselman's a redshirt senior. I think Stays has 2 years of eligibility left. So they needed to get guys in. And certainly, I mean, they're selling something to them, and they're doing a great job recruiting them. So maybe they do have a plan to use them more, and they do. And maybe it even just shows up as using them more in the red zone. And they already do that, but maybe it's just more active using them in the red zone. I can see that. But when it comes to, like Jack, you said earlier, playing between the 20s, I'm a little skeptical of it.
Hey, one thing, a follow-up on that real quick. If you enjoyed this tight end conversation, like Jack had mentioned a second ago, that's actually something I wrote about yesterday. As Alec Abelin talked to the media just a couple of days ago, he actually talked about that. He said, look, when I got hired basically in early 2023, we went through the summer and there was nothing. We were not successful on the recruiting trail. Then we got all the way to December and we still weren't successful on the recruiting trail. He talked a lot about how that was, a very anxious kind of stretch in his life. From December to January, Tennessee basically wrangled up 4 tight ends between Holden Stays, Cole Harrison, the other tight end, the other transfer that they got, Kitselman, and then Jack Van Dorselaer. And then just like a week or two ago, they flipped Desan Brame from Oregon. So there's certainly been a lot of good tight end work. And again, you can go and find that article over on RockyTopInsider.com.
Yeah, he knew that date that Jonathan Eccles flipped his commitment from Tennessee to
Yes, he
South
did.
Florida. He pulled it. He goes December 6th or whatever it was. I don't remember it.
4th, 5th. Yeah.
December 4th, things were looking awful bleak. He knew,
Yep.
he knew that date of the one tight end commit that he had inherited, flipped
Yes.
to go play for Alex Golesh. And you're right. Since then, he's been on a tear in the recruiting trail and has picked up and even Carson Snead too in the 26th class earlier this week. So a big stretch for Alec Ablin.
No doubt about it. Let's get into our last buy or sell. This is the treetop one. We talked last week how we hadn't really talked a lot of Nico. I made a comment of we don't do that here on this Rock Top Insider Press Pass. And as you've heard or watched for the first 45 minutes, we do get into the weeds a little bit here. We love to. So the Nico content isn't going to be as prevalent as you'd see on ESPN, but we are going to have a buy or sell. That is a big topic here. And it's looking in the distant future. But buy or sell, Ryan? Nico Iamaleava has to be a Heisman finalist for Tennessee to get a home playoff game.
I didn't do enough research here. And here's the question to me. So
it's just a gut
they
thing.
have to be top 8, right?
Right.
You know, or in theory 5 to 8. Not win the SEC and be 5 to 8. So to me, the big question is how many SEC teams are in that 5 to 8 range? 2
say
feels
max 2.
Max,
yeah.
2 feels like the likely answer to me. And with that, you're saying a top 3 team in the SEC, I am buying. I think that Tennessee's offense would have to be top 5 in the country to do that, or at least top 10. The passing offense would have to be really good. Tennessee's offense would have to look a lot like it did in 2022. And if Hendon Hooker had never gotten injured in 2022, then he would have been a Heisman finalist. And heck, if Tennessee had beaten South Carolina in that game, he might have won and he stayed healthy. He might have won the Heisman. So I will buy that. I think Nico will, if Tennessee is a team that is either wins the SEC or has a bye in the first round or is a home game in the first round of the college football playoff, Nico is a finalist in New York for the Heisman.
I am glad that you bought that because I wonder if maybe we can, work through some stuff here because I'm going to sell it. And I thought about this question for a lot today during the long in between that we had between practice and press conferences. But I went back and I looked, right? Last year was 4 quarterbacks in the Heisman race. And I do want to break this down in different parts. Let's just talk about Heisman, right, for starters. There were 4 quarterbacks in the Heisman race last year. There were 4 quarterbacks in the one before that. So it's kind of trending right now in college football that the majority of the Heisman finalists are going to be a quarterback. Let's say there's 4. Then Nico Iamaleava just has to be the 5th best quarterback. He might not make that Heisman ceremony, but even if he was still the 5th quarterback, I still think that Tennessee is in a good position. That means there's something's going well. So I think that you can get to the 5 through 8 range of the college football playoffs with a quarterback who's not a Heisman contender, if that's kind of the way that it goes. Now, I do think that in order to get to maybe the SEC championship game, maybe then you're talking about a Heisman level contender because you're only talking about 2 spots, right, from a really stout 16-team conference. So, and I do think that Nico is going to be good. But look, we talked about this last week, right? What is this running back room going to look like? How are they going to be able to develop and stay healthy throughout the year? I'm not really sure. So I do think that he needs some extra pieces around him in order to kind of elevate this team to where it could be if it's potentially in that 5 to 8 range. So all that basically goes to say is that I think that he can have a really phenomenal year. I think that he could be the 5th best quarterback in the league, and I still think they could be potentially in play for that spot. I'm far less likely about the SEC championship game. I think you're probably going to be talking about a Heisman contender if Tennessee finishes the SEC as one of those top 2 spots over a Texas, Alabama, Georgia, whoever it's going to be, Ole Miss. But I think if you're talking about that 5 to 8 range, I'm not so sure that Tennessee couldn't make it, even if they have nobody at the ceremony in New York later this year. So I'm going to sell. I do think that Tennessee can make the playoffs and host a game, even if Nico is not a Heisman contender, but he needs to be really good. Like he needs to be right there on the outside. If there's 3 quarterbacks and 1 running back, he needs to be the 4th quarterback. If there's 4 quarterbacks, he would need to then be the 5th quarterback or the 6th quarterback at minimum. So that's just kind of the way that I see it rolling out. I'm going to sell that one.
Here's where I disagree with the logic.
Okay.
I think you look at the quarterbacks this year in the country, and Jack would know this better than probably the both of us, certainly me, because he covers a lot more of college football as a whole. Seemed like a
Always
great
college
year
football.
for quarterbacks. Always college football. Check it out.
That's it. Always.
It seems like it's a great year for quarterbacks in the SEC. It feels like most of the best quarterbacks in the country are in the SEC.
After a bad year last year.
And you look at Jalen Milroe at Alabama, Carson Beck at Georgia, Quinn Ewers at Texas. I'd imagine those three guys are probably top 5 in Heisman odds right now. Maybe Dylan Gabriel at Oregon up there too. That's kind of your top
definitely
class.
Beck and Ewers are going to be 1, 2 in which order? Yeah.
And heck, you could throw Jackson Arnold at Ole Miss too in there. I don't think he quite has that ceiling. But another guy that you would mention having a real big year. Well, and it's not directly tied to best team to the quarterback who had the best season, but the sport's so quarterback dominated that I feel like largely those two things are going to intertwine. And I think at least Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, take the quarterback position out compared to Tennessee. All those teams have better rosters to me than Tennessee. All three of those. So if you're telling me that Tennessee is finishing ahead of Alabama or is finishing ahead of one of those teams, because like we said, we think only 3 SEC teams would be in the 1 to 8. Then to me, Nico's having a better year than those guys. And then again, I start looking around the rest of the country. Maybe it's a receiver, or a running back, or a defensive player that truly pops up and has a great season. But I start looking around the quarterbacks in the rest of the country, and I think I'm kind of like, I'll roll the dice with there not being 2 quarterbacks outside the SEC that has a better season than Nico if Tennessee is in the college football, or is 1 to 8 in the college football playoff rankings. So that's where I'd say that I think if Tennessee is going to be one of the 3 best teams in the SEC, which we're saying they're going to have to in this scenario, I think he's having a better year than at least one of Carson Beck, Jalen Milroe, and Quinn Ewers. And I don't think there's 2 other guys in the country that are having a better year than him as well in this scenario.
Okay, very well said. I'm still going to sell, but I will say I didn't think about that aspect. I was kind of just taking it in a broad standpoint, right? Can Nico Iamaleava be the 5th best quarterback and Tennessee still be good? Yes, but I do like that you broke it down there and said that, look, but most of these contenders are probably going to be from your own conference, right? So that is more of a head-to-head battle when you're talking about, week 12 in Athens. You're talking about week 8 in Knoxville, right? Whatever that might be, as opposed to just, hey, he could be the 5th best or something like that. So I'm not I'm not backtracking on my point. I'm still selling, but that does make a lot of sense. And that is something that I don't think is super, is a line of thought that's super easy to get to. So I think you did uncover something there. Jack, are you going to kind of split the difference? Which way are you going to lean?
BetMGM Heisman odds. Dylan Gabriel actually leads the way narrowly over Carson Beck. Quinn Ewers is 3rd, Milroe 4th, Dart 5th. That's the top 5. There's 4 SEC quarterbacks there. You talked about, Ryan, how Tennessee needs to be the 3rd best SEC team to get a home playoff game. Oh, by the way, if you think that a team is going to get penalized for making Atlanta and falling to 10-3, where other 10-2 teams in the SEC are going to benefit, I don't think that's going to be the case. If you make Atlanta and you're the SEC runner-up, I think you're getting a home playoff game, even if technically you have one more loss than, other 10-2 teams in the league. So I honestly think that helps. But being the 3rd best SEC team, Nico's going to have to be better than Milroe and Dart. I feel like the latter is a likelihood, honestly, if Tennessee is going to be in this conversation, because, dude, this hype of offense, just the way Tennessee is, it's so reliant on great quarterback play. And he has to be the difference maker for Tennessee, because I don't think the wide receivers are going to elevate Nico. I don't think Tennessee can have a workhorse running back who's potentially one of the better backs in the league, like Missouri did last year. I mean, Cody Schrader was so huge to their 10-win season. Sure, Brady Cook was good, and their defense was sneaky good. But Cody Schrader, I mean, he ran for over 200 yards against Tennessee and became the SEC's best back as the season progressed. So to me, he was the reason Missouri was able to do what they did offensively. I don't know if Tennessee's going to have that guy. Yes, Tennessee's pass rush is going to be elite, but I have questions about how good the linebacker spot can be, given the inexperience. And the secondary is a complete question mark. Could be really good, could be really bad. So it's all on Nico's shoulders for Tennessee to win 10 games this year. That means they have to win in Norman, of course. And even if they're going to be the 3rd best team in the SEC, who knows? They may have to go 11-1. So if Tennessee's going to have a season like that, to me, it's going to be because of number 8. And to me, that's going to put Nico in New York, because, I mean, if you look at the other guys outside of the league, yeah, Dylan Gabriel, like I said, is up there. But after that, I mean, Cam Ward, yeah, maybe Miami has a heck of a season. I could see him doing it. But Will Howard, maybe he gets a Stetson Bennett-esque nod just because Ohio State is so dang good that because you're the quarterback of the best team, you're in New York, which would be fraudulent. But maybe it's a possibility, just like Stetson going 2 years ago was fraudulent. And after that, I don't
It
really
could be
see
that
any
politicking too.
possibilities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
good.
I
Yeah.
think that
You're
scenario
right.
there's so much politicking in the Heisman, and all those Midwest voters are going to get somebody in the Big Ten on the ballot. And obviously, I know Dylan Gabriel's in the Big Ten too now, but it feels they love them some Ohio State, they love them some Michigan, they love them some Penn State, and that feels like to me would be the more likely, or maybe
Like
it's
how, yeah, it's like how SEC writers love their Alabama, right? It's the thing that's
yeah.
gone. It's been the engine the last 10 years. So good point.
But bottom line is, Nico would have to be the third best quarterback in the league, minimum, for this to happen. That would put him probably behind Beck and Ewers. And because Texas and Georgia are better than Tennessee as a roster, Nico will have to be flashier than those two, potentially leapfrogging him over one of them two. And my pick would be Quinn Ewers just because I think Carson Beck is so good. He'd be my Heisman pick. But it'd probably be Quinn Ewers, in my opinion, just because of what Texas has lost and potentially taking a step back. But Nico's going to have to be the guy for Tennessee to have a home playoff game, and therefore the cause of that, the result of that would be him in New York. So I am buying this. If Tennessee is going to have a home playoff game, Nico will be a Heisman finalist. Different than contender, by the way. There can be 10 Heisman contenders. We're talking finalists, top 4.
Yeah. I really like this question, and I'm glad that we kind of brought it up last. Some of these other buy or sells, obviously they've all been good, but like the tight ends, like, yeah, we're going to wait and see, right? Like we will have
Yeah.
a definitive answer, but I think that this one's really fascinating to think about, and I'd love to see what people think. You can drop your thoughts in the comments below if you're on YouTube. But yeah, there's just so many routes and so many different things that could happen with this question, kind of how you get to that final point that Tennessee wants to get to, that is the playoffs. So I think that this was a fascinating question to kind of ponder through.
Yeah. That's pretty much going to wrap it up on this pod. I know, Rick, we have to do our WWE thing, but one last Tennessee note. I'd feel remiss if we didn't mention Faizon Brandon committing to Tennessee, top player in the 26 class, another 5-star quarterback for Josh Heupel. That's George McIntyre, Faizon Brandon. If you have to come to campus who are lined up here, of course, Nico being a 5-star, and even Jake Merklinger, a 4-star in the 24 class. So, I mean, it's just been ridiculous how well Tennessee has recruited the quarterback position. And my biggest takeaway is this gives Tennessee such a safe floor moving forward, given how, you have to have a really good quarterback to win in the SEC and in college football nowadays. Having these 5-star guys, as long as they hit somewhat, it gives Tennessee a pretty safe floor moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I wrote about it. I think it's the biggest reason for optimism about Heupel long term is the way they've been able to recruit quarterbacks, and the fact that you just feel good that he can develop and Tennessee can have high level quarterback play. And like you said, how important that is in a sport. Another good sign. I just think state of North Carolina is so important to Tennessee from a recruiting standpoint. I thought for so long, that was one of the things I pointed to. One of the reasons I thought things looked so hopeless wouldn't be the right word, but
Bleak.
like a lack of optimism for bleak. Yeah, why things look so bleak for Tennessee. It's just in the recruiting world of Georgia area you want to recruit. Tennessee has to recruit. Georgia is the best program, or one of the best programs in college football. Luckily, there's enough kids in Georgia you can still get them. But in going into the Carolinas has been the bread and butter for Tennessee when they're at their best too. And Clemson was so good for a handful of years that felt like such a hard task to beat Clemson out for kids. But now Clemson, obviously still a good program, but not at the same level they were 5 years ago. It feels like Tennessee is emphasizing the right areas on the recruiting trail and continues to have success in North Carolina, and they hope to get more with David Sanders here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and just one last quick thing on Faizon Brandon. He is from Hendon Hooker's area in North Carolina. We've heard that he worked out with Hendon Hooker at various times as he's coming up. He's only going into his junior season this fall. He's a phenomenal quarterback prospect who you watch the highlight tapes and then you think he's only a sophomore. He can only be a sophomore. I mean, he led his playoff team to the quarterfinals in his first starting senior again as just a sophomore. He destroyed the first 3 teams that he played. He is extremely athletic. What I like the most about his game is that he might not have the rocket arm that a Joe Milton did or something like that, but he's got finesse and he's got touch with his passes. It's very easy to see in the highlight film. It's very easy to hear from other experts around the industry about what they're saying about him. He's just a guy with a knack for throwing the ball, and I think that obviously works into a Josh Heupel offense. So huge win for Tennessee. We'll see how the recruiting shift a little bit. He is 24/7's top overall ranked player in the class, but I think just a really, really home run prospect. George McIntyre was a big one. Jake Merklinger was a nice piece to add, especially right after Nico. But I think this is 1A and 1B with Nico as, transformational Tennessee players who have a future at Rocky Top, at least as he does right now.
There you have it. All right, Rick. Got 15 options. You guessed the Heartbreak Kid last week. Of course, if you see, it's the 6th one from the left on the bottom row with hearts on the pants. But where are we going this week, Rick, on your guessing my 16 wrestlers up top there in the frame?
I'd like to dedicate this win to the guy who commented on the last video that he doesn't like WWE and that he was complete with Ryan. I'd like to dedicate this win to both Ryan and that commenter, who, by the way, we're very excited that you are tuning into the RTI video podcast. You obviously made it to the end. Huge thank you for doing that. How about top row red shirt? Is that one Nicholas Foley?
That is correct. Mick Foley. You got it.
Thank you. All right, move on.
All right. Well, that's it for the podcast, everybody. Covered a lot of ground today. Good job, guys. So
yeah, that was a good one.
24 days out. We'll have a couple more, obviously, before the season. Once every week, can expect it on Wednesday or Thursday. We're going to have schedule predictions soon. Some more fall camp talk, of course, and everything getting ready for week 1 before we have the full week 1 preview in that last week of August. So it's almost here, people. Couldn't be more excited. If you want to follow Rocky Top Insider on social media, you can do that at Rocky Top Insider. Of course, subscribe, like, comment, do whatever you got to do on our YouTube video here. Of course, our podcast now has a video portion you should check out. You can also follow Rick Butler at Rick Butler on all socials, Ryan at rshump00. That's SCHUMP. You can also follow me at Jack Foster Media. So until next week when we see you, have a good week, everybody, and peace.